Hey guys, today I want to show you my very first weaving, the thing that I made at the very start when I was learning how to weave. And I'm going to show you also some of the things that I've been weaving more recently and see if there's a way that I can help you get started with weaving as well. Hey guys, welcome to the SweetGeorgia channel. I'm Felicia from SweetGeorgia and this is Taking Back Friday. This is a space where we come every Friday and we talk about something to do with knitting or spinning or weaving or dyeing. Today I'm going to talk about getting started with weaving and where you can take it. Now, if you've been watching the channel for some time now, you'll know that I am quite obsessed with weaving. I love weaving. I love weaving with my own yarns, my own hand-dyed yarns, my own hand-spun yarns, whatever it is. I have really enjoyed weaving from the moment that I have tried it. And that's why I've been so passionate about trying to encourage people to also try weaving, because when they discover it, when they finally sit down at the loom, the comment that I've been hearing more recently, more often than not, is, I've been waiting my whole life for this. But as you know, one of the big challenges to learning how to weave is, getting access to equipment or expertise, figuring out how this all works. There's multiple steps, multiple pieces of equipment. How do they all work? How do you get a piece of cloth at the end of the day? And so that's where very often rigid heddle looms come into play. They're very easy. They're very quick to warp up. You can get warped in about an hour and you can start weaving. And so recently, Leah, who edits many of our videos for the School of SweetGeorgia, she wove her very first scarf ever. She wove it on a little rigid heddle loom. So we'd sent her home with a Ashford sample-it loom that she practiced with over the weekend, and she wove off a little bit of whatever happened to be on that warp. And then she came back, and then we sat together and warped a rigid heddle loom from scratch, and she took that home and actually wove her final scarf on that. So that is absolutely one way to go about learning how to weave and getting a feel for that shuttle and all of that kind of stuff. Now, I was extremely lucky. I had the opportunity when I started learning how to weave. I was in a space that had lots of looms. I had access to these looms. And so the very first thing that I learned on was a Dorothy, it was a Leclerc Dorothy, 15-inch wide, 4-shaft table loom. And so that's just kind of like a simpler version of basically what I have back here, which is an Ashford table loom, also about 16 inches wide. This one happens to be 8 shaft, actually. This is 8 shaft, but I'm only using 4 shafts right now. But it can be very simple. Now, those Leclerc Dorothy table looms, I see them on marketplaces all the time, sometimes going as low as $50 for an old table loom that somebody is needing to pass on to the next person. And so there are lots and lots of ways to get access to those older used looms. Very accessible. I often even find a lot of floor looms that are available at very reasonable prices if you're looking for a used piece of equipment. You just have to be careful about a couple of things when you're looking for an older loom. But there are a lot of used looms out there if you're willing to hunt around and look for something that's going to work for you. So I'm going to show you, this is the very first thing that I ever wove on a table loom, or that I ever wove ever. I didn't start with the rigid heddle, I started with the table loom. So this is a project that is very narrow warp. This was all leftover wool. It was wool that was just happened to be in the cupboards of the place where I was learning how to spin and how to weave. That's Place des Arts in Coquitlam, if anybody is local here. A lot of this wool was leftovers, but much of it is also the Maurice Brassard Quebecois wool. It's a 2-ply wool that works up to be about a DK worsted weight, and it's a great weight for learning how to weave with. And so this, this warp here, just put on some stripes. I had to make it count, I think a total of 80 ends altogether. And then I put this on the loom. I think it was set at 10 ends per inch. Basically, that's what I used to get started. So you can see down here, this is my plain weave section. So I've got some plain weave happening here. And then this is my basket weave section. And this is my tutu twill section. You can see I made a mistake here. There's a spot where I basically missed a pick. So those are roughly the first 3 sections. So I was figuring out, how hard to beat. How do I get this to be not too loose, not too dense, counting how many picks per inch, making sure that, you know, it was about even. So if I have 10 ends per inch or 10 warp ends per inch on the loom, then I also want to weave and get 10 picks per inch on the loom. So it was just practicing that first section. You can see also here I was learning how to do twisted fringe for the very first time. So there's twisted fringe, basket weave, tutu twill, and then a lot of the rest of these sections is me experimenting with hand spun. So this is some of my pink Polworth hand spun. There's a little bit more Quebecois. There's more hand spun. This is like a reverse twill with hand spun, more hand spun, more hand spun, more hand spun, and then trying out some different kinds of basket weave and things like that at the end here. Putting in a little bit of boucle for texture and just seeing how that all works up. And then after pulling this off of the loom, then taking it and washing it to sort of finish it. So this is basically what I wove back in 2006, and that's when I started learning all of this stuff. Now, after a couple of years, I ended up opening SweetGeorgia, the studio, our very first studio outside of my house, and that was back in about 2008, 2009. And so around 2009, 2010, I started teaching weaving in that studio space because somehow we had acquired some floor looms and things like that. And so I brought in students so that way we could all learn how to weave on 4-shaft looms together. And so this is the project that I designed for them to do. So you can see it's actually quite similar to my original project, which I was learned on. But again, this one has a bit more structure to, you know, how many stripes are in here, what kind of colors to mix and blend, and all these kinds of things. And again, this was Quebecois wool as well. That Quebecois 2-ply, it works up so nicely. It's very, very woolly. It's easy to read, it's easy to see. It's just very, very easy to use. But you can see all of the interesting color combinations that happen when you're mixing all of these different colors together with these different kinds of weave structures. These are mostly twills. There are a bunch of different kinds of twill samplers. So this one was probably about 2010 when this one was done. And then fast forward to a couple of years ago when we first started the School of SweetGeorgia. One of the very first classes that we put in the weaving section behind essential weaving was one that was called multi-shaft weaving basics. And this is the project that came out of that. So this is based on the previous sampler as well. And again, we're starting with plain weave, figuring out how plain weave works, then figuring out how tutu twill works, and then your basket weave, and stripes, and so on and so on and so on, and all of these different samples. Just really getting an overview of how does a 4-shaft loom work, how do you get it to make all of these different patterns and everything. And so this project probably came out in about 2020, I think is about that. So it's about 10 years between this one and this one. So that's always my starting place for people who are learning to weave for the very, very first time. If you can get your hands on a 4-shaft table loom, something that's got a very narrow weaving width, something that's really easy and accessible, and then putting on a narrow warp, something that's about 8 inches wide, worsted weight, DK weight, something that's woolly, something that will full, and then just practice a bunch of different treadling patterns, or, you know, lifting the different shafts so that you get some of these different patterns, and just explore and play. How does it work? How do you beat all of those kinds of things? Now, right now in the school, the most recent thing that I've put up there is actually a class called Weaving Twills on 4 shafts. And that is taking all of these little samplers and going one step further and doing them as a very organized GAMP. Ta-da! So this is the GAMP project that is in the Weaving Twills on 4 shafts class. So I go through how to set up a GAMP like this. And a GAMP is basically an opportunity to try out a lot of different combinations. So in this case here, up at this top square, this is sort of a straight draw threading. And so it produces that tutu twill, same as in the previous samplers. And then this is another kind of threading. This is called a point twill threading. Here is a broken twill threading, and the last one is rose path. And so having these 4 different kinds of threading patterns in your heddles and the shafts allows different threads, different warp ends to lift with the different combinations. And so you can treadle different patterns and start to produce a whole bunch of different weave structures. And so this GAMP allows you to see 32 different options. So I like doing these kinds of projects because this is a way of sort of auditioning a whole bunch of different patterns very, very quickly and seeing what looks good to you, what do you like. And when you find something that you like, you can extrapolate it into a bigger project. So you're using this almost like a giant swatch for designing other projects. So in this case, I might have decided, oh, I like this particular box, and then take the threading pattern and then the treadling progression for this, and then extrapolating that into a larger project. So at the end of that Weaving Twills on 4-shaft class, I produced 3 blankets that were designed based on those twill patterns. So one of the blankets is a yellow blanket using the Gist Beam color in Dandelion. And I love, love, love that yarn. It was really, really wonderful to work with. I also used that Gist Beam as warp for all 3 blankets. But you can see that then this is the second blanket that I wove. This is, ta-da! So that's the second blanket, and this one is using a gradient hand-dyed sock blank as the weft. And this one is the third blanket. This one is using Flax and Silk Fine in Magician as the weft yarn. And so this is a really subtle but also very tonal hand-dyed yarn and produces quite a lovely effect. You can see kind of up close. And you can see how drapey and slinky these blankets are actually. They're nice. They were supposed to be baby blanket size, but they're way bigger than I expected. But these are the kinds of projects that we're working on in that new class, that Weaving Twills on 4 Shafts class. Now, while it's all well and good for me to provide you with all the videos and provide you with all of the patterns and the weaving drafts in order to make all these things, that's one thing, but I feel like the very next step is also being able to do it alongside you. And so what we're going to do is, with this course, we're using it sort of as the foundation for a study group that we're going to start in January. So a weaving study group in January is all going to be about weaving this twill gamp, and then after that, helping you to use that information to design your own project. So you may or may not want to use this particular yarn for your gamp. You might want to use a different yarn. So like in this case, I wove the same gamp again, but using different yarn. In this case, this is BFL and Silk Fine. And so this is great because this serves as a really, really great swatch or sample for what I could weave using this yarn, because this is wool and this one's cotton. They feel different. They behave differently. They're just different. So if you are interested in joining me for the study group starting in January next year, January 2022, for the Weaving Twills on 4 Shafts sort of study group, I would really encourage you to join the school now and start looking at some of those classes that we've already published. So looking at essential weaving and getting started there, looking at the multi-shaft weaving basics class, and then also looking at a lot of our hand woven color stuff as well. We have a lot of weaving courses in there, and then following along with this Weaving Twills on 4 Shafts class now. And then in January we have a couple more classes coming with Laura Fry. So there's the Intentional Weaver, and there is a class on wet finishing. So what to do after you take these things off the loom. How do you wash them? How do you make them full? How much do you full them? All sorts of things like that are answered in that class. It was very helpful. So this past year in the School of SweetGeorgia, we've been really trying to build out more of our content in order to encourage people to join us through these study groups. So in the summer, we did the natural dye study group, and then we've just finished doing the spinning study group. And yeah, the next one that we're going to be working on is a weaving study group, and then after that, we'll be focusing a little bit on knitting. And so we just kind of move through these different crafts throughout the year and working on different themes. And so I really encourage you to get your hands on a 4-shaft loom, put on an arrow warp, weave a little bit of experimental cloth, and then start looking at doing a more structured study of how those twills work. And yeah, I hope that you will join us in the school to do all of that. I'm in there. You can ping me, you can message me, you can ask me questions. I'm happy to help wherever I can. And yeah, I hope to see you weaving soon too. So that is basically it for today. I would love to hear from you and hear about your experiences with learning weaving for the very, very first time. So that is it for today. If you like this episode, please do hit the like button. And if you would like to see more stuff like this, please do hit subscribe. Come here almost every Friday to talk about something to do with color and the fiber arts. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.